is with us now. Very good. Any of y'all ever been in a murderous riot? Show of hands. Nobody just yet. All right. Y'all ever been in a fight that came to blows? Well, we might have some reluctant hands. You ever seen big street fight? You ever had pay-per-view fight on the TV? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Keep letting your mind wander. Yeah. A riotous fight. A mob of people. What's the biggest crowd you ever been in? Hit that music for me, will you? Yeah. One of these days. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Your mind can start going there now, right? Blood's starting to boil, isn't it, Butch? You just kind of want to slap the person next to you sometimes, don't you? Oh, no husbands and wives in the crowd, I guess, huh? You ever seen things escalate so far? You feel like, all right, let's just put on a glove, huh? You want to fight, huh? You want to go? No? Butch, you're older than me. Come on, let's fight. No? Last week, in that message, everybody was in their prime, right? Everybody was in tip-top shape, right? There weren't no old folks in the crowd that wanted to murder Jesus, right? It was only young people that wanted to kill Jesus, right? It was only the people that wanted to fight that wanted to kill, yeah? All right, kill that music before we kill Jesus, yeah? I just want to lighten the load a little bit, you know? Sometimes you come to church and you got to worry about your shirt being tucked in and everything's top notch and you sit where you're supposed to, minding your P's and Q's and stuff. And man, we need to lighten this load a little bit because we are going to talk about a murderous riot. Having not participated in one myself, I can't get on that level. And maybe you can't, we've watched movies like Rocky. We've seen a film, romanticizing different aspects of war. All these different things that might happen that we have an idea of what something looks like, but we've never been in those shoes, never been in that situation ourselves. So we know from last week that all eyes are on Jesus. And I always wondered when Jesus was traveling place to place and we were talking about him being, filled with that Holy Spirit, what was his playlist coming into his hometown? Now, nobody had their smartphone or their iPod or their Walkman or their Discman. But you imagine in a group of people, you ever been on a long journey and people start singing a song on that long journey and then everybody starts singing that song on the long journey? What was the song leading the train on the way into Nazareth that day? Jesus full of the Holy Spirit, knowing what he was probably going to speak on when he filled that pulpit that day, knowing that was going to rustle up some feathers, get under some people's skins. It was going to basically evoke a fight. Well, if they'd only had Survivor and Eye of the Tiger 2,000 years ago, that might have been on his playlist, you think? But what we know, because the text tells us that all eyes are on Jesus. Now, all I needed to do was play a little song, put some boxing gloves on to get your eyes on me. What's Jesus doing to get everybody amazed? Well, it's been the reports. It's been what he's done elsewhere in that area that we looked at on the map last week. And they're figuring that when he comes to his hometown, more, the same, above and beyond what they've been hearing about is going to happen right there in their hometown. They're very expectant that this is going to happen, but we're going to discover today that doesn't necessarily lead to faith or growing their faith. We all say that we are recipients of God's grace, yet countless times our faith doesn't show that we believe we are recipients of God's grace because we get stingy with our own grace. who deserves it, who doesn't, who's looking for a fight, and they're going to get one. You know, we don't really operate too well with eyes of faith and a heart full of grace. And today, if we find ourselves saying, well, I wouldn't do that. I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover. I don't try to fight with other people. You know, I'm not one to stir the pot. I'm fearful for you. Because if you find yourself saying that stuff, then you fit well in this crowd. And that's troublesome for all of us because we'll be painted as a liar and our faith will be a bit fictitious. You know, I've said it already. I've never been in a fight like this. You haven't been in a fight like this, right? Have you seen videos of rioting? Yeah? You ever want to get down in that crowd and throw some rocks? Want to have some tear gas thrown at you? Want to have somebody in a flak jacket and body armor thump you? But we see that stuff if we watch enough news, don't we? We can find it. And so I wonder, well, what was it like a couple millennia ago in Nazareth? And you know what? We're in luck, folks. We are in luck. This church has a lot of history. You'd agree? Well, I went through some files, and just like I found that actual picture of Jesus at Nazareth last week, I found footage, real footage. Now, you may not believe me, but this is real, God-honest footage of that fight 2,000 years ago in Nazareth. Roll that footage, will you?
Come to the center of the ring. You touch gloves. You commence fighting. You lasted longer than I thought. What? Good Steve. Steve.
Hurry up, we're all busy.
Listen, stay away from him. Try the herbal shuffle.
That's how it happened, folks. I challenged you last week to rid yourself of the mental image of what you had for Jesus. You didn't know he looked like Steve Urkel. Just trying to lighten the load a little bit before things get a bit heavier. Today and last week we said we don't know exactly what went on during this text. Luke is not giving us the cinematography that we desire when we're reading this narrative. And so we also understand that we don't understand what it is to be Jewish or much about what it was like to be alive in the first century. And everybody I've been reading about in terms of this text and the scholars who study it says we really don't have an idea of what worship in the first century Jewish community really looked like. We have ideas, we have a lot of speculation, but we don't even know what that looked like. And so we're always thrust in that situation where I'm challenging us again and again. Don't apply the 21st century version of you and what you understand to be right and normal within religion and say, that's how it happened, a couple millennia ago. And that's challenging for us. So let's get into this text, chapter 4, verse 21, and see what we can understand and discover without reading too much into things. But we did already watch Steve Urkel, so maybe it's too late. He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the attendant, and sat down. All eyes in the synagogue looked at him intently. Then he began to speak to them. The scripture you've just heard has been fulfilled this very day. Now that's where we ended last week. And if you recall, there's tension in the room. And there might already be some normalized tension when you've got the traveling preacher filling the pulpit. Because they're the out-of-towner, They don't do everything maybe the way you're accustomed to them doing. So they're already that, substitute teacher type tension in the room maybe. But there's suspense because they have heard miraculous stories that even for us in our modern world just seem out of this world. And they're anticipating something like that happening. And you can imagine every moment that nothing happens, the tension only heightens itself. The service is almost over. He hasn't raised anybody from the dead yet. The episode is about to conclude, and the boils on the leper are still there. Everything is building, and then he says what he says, and then we continue in the 22nd verse. Everyone spoke well of him and was amazed by the gracious words that came from his lips. How can this be, they asked. Isn't this Joseph's son? Now let's ponder on this question just a little bit. The question may be read with thoughts of approval. Hey, it's the hometown boy. It's Joseph's boy. He and my boy used to play kick the can together. They used to terrorize the neighborhood girls. They used to pull their hair and chase them around. That Jesus, the carpenter's son, he's good help. If you want to hire somebody on that's going to work hard all day, man, hire Jesus. Get his dad to come along too. But it's also a bit skeptical. Isn't that Joseph's son? You've seen the kind of construction work he does, right? Nobody ever talks like that about contractors, do they? Everybody's top notch. Everybody's pleased when the job is done and the check has been handed over, right? Nobody complains when the drywaller leaves and then some nails start popping. You got to imagine that they're skeptical because they know about the scandal that we've been discovering is right here in these ancient stories. Long before Christmas, we were looking at the unlikely nature of this child becoming a man who would change the world because he is God's son. And can you imagine if Jesus, instead of Nazareth, Knoxville, Galesburg, the Rova community, wouldn't we be just as amazed, yet just as skeptical? So we can better understand maybe what's happening when people say things along the lines in reference to us. Who would have thought that night boy would have turned out like that? Isn't that Bill and Diane's boy? You remember him. He didn't used to look like that. Isn't that the kid we all know? Don't I have kids that went to school with him? What age did you graduate? I think I know you. I think I remember you, but you're a lot different than you used to be. Does he expect us all to believe he's somebody important? Does he really know what he's talking about? Now, these questions, aren't they just kind of normal? Yeah, I mean, they're not really hostile, are they? They're not really compliments, are they? It's all kind of backhanded questioning, You turned out pretty good, given your situation. How'd you do it? I never really cared for tattoos, but you're different. I never hear any backhanded questions or compliments, no. Nazareth is desiring to be blessed the way they have heard so many other people be blessed. And they're a bit miffed here. Their concern is growing because Capernaum seemed to get first dibs. Well, how come they got these miracles when he's not even from there? We've been putting up with this dude and his scandalous existence for years. Why'd he go down to the way, to that beachside community and raise the dead there? And this is where the shift begins to happen. The dance beyond these questions that we so easily gloss over because he is just the carpenter's son. But we understand in the room that everybody is kind of on edge already. Everybody is expectant. And this is a dominated world where there is a foreign power oppressing everyone in sight. And then your brothers and sisters, rather than wipe from the face of the earth, are in cahoots with the rulers of the world so as to retain their station and keep a hold of their wealth while everybody takes more and more from you. And when you are a part of that oppression, meaning you're receiving it from others, who gets picked on the most? The rich in our community or the poor? And which are there more of today? Which do you think we're more of then? So that's what's happening here when everybody is starting to get more and more tense, and the excitement is kind of in balance between what's good and what's evil, and we have trouble identifying the difference many times ourselves. Let's continue in the story, the 23rd verse. They ask questions, right? Isn't this Joseph's boy? So then Jesus said, you will undoubtedly quote me this proverb, physician, heal yourself, meaning do miracles here in your hometown like those you did in Capernaum. But I tell you the truth, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Now, the hometown here in other translations are going to say his own kin, his own house, his own country. Anybody, when they were a young person, go on a sleepover? Not a one of you. Didn't have friends, huh? Oh, okay. Lonely group here. Anybody come over to somebody's house for stovetop stuffing? Yeah? Ever set another plate around the table for your friend after practice? Yeah? So own kin, hometown, all this weaving and interconnectedness within a community that they say maybe a couple hundred people living here. If you only got a couple hundred people living around you, how well do you know everyone? And how well does everyone know you? Pretty well, I would say. And so he says all of this to people who know him very well. And what we know is Jesus will be rejected by his hometown. Now, this is us casting shade on an original audience that hasn't yet come to that conclusion, mind you. Okay? We have hindsight. We can armchair quarterback this all we want. But if you're in the crowd, you're upset, you've got back pain, you'd like Jesus to heal it, you've got financial issues, you'd like Jesus to, maybe deepen your pockets, you've got strife at home that nobody else knows about you except for you and the missus and the kids, you'd like Jesus to intervene. Come on, get with it. Did the people in Capernaum have to wait this long to see these amazing things? And now you tell us that no prophet is received in his hometown. He will be rejected by his own people. Because elsewhere, he healed a rich guy's kid. Because elsewhere, he had done miracles, so they expected he would do better for them. And elsewhere, he had done more, so he's going to do for them the most. And next in this story, he's going to challenge the knowledge of ancient scripture, prophets, and prophecies. And we're going to be challenged by that too. Because if we pulled the room and said, how much do you know about prophets of the Old Testament? How much do you know about the exact prophecies that these prophets told? And how much do you know about their ministry that was hundreds of thousands of years ago? And nobody's going to want to do this, right? You think anybody in that crowd wanted to themselves? Let's read what Jesus says. Verse 25. Certainly there were many needy widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the heavens were closed for 3.5 years and a severe famine devastated the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them. You think he paused there for a second? I like that silence because it upsets people. Let's keep going. He was sent instead to a foreigner, a widow named Zarephath, in the land of Sidon. And many in Israel had leprosy in the time of the prophet Elisha, but the only one healed was Naaman, a Syrian. A Syrian. Well, it's still a popular word in our culture these days, isn't it? The country of Syria. Do you know that the Jewish folks didn't like Syrian folks? Did you know American folks don't seem to like Syrian folks? It seems people not liking people have been around for some time. Yeah? You ever been in a group of folks in a small town where some people like some people and some people don't like some people? You ever sat in a room where some people like some people and some people don't like some people? You ever sat down at Thanksgiving dinner where some people like some people and some people don't like some people? Amen. Oh, Lordy. We can see ourselves more and more in this hometown story. Jesus, he's not considered a prophet yet. They're leaning towards that. He's doing prophet-like things, but we haven't given him that title just yet in terms of the hometown crowd. And now he's talked to us about something that seems just very double-edged. Because when Elijah, the prophet of old, the one that they had heard stories about from firelight and candlelight for generations on end, was somebody who raised a dead person, but it was a single mother's son, and she was a pagan, meaning she wasn't cut from the cloth that you and I were, and maybe she has her own scandal as to why she is alone and raising this child. And yet the prophet raises this son from the dead because in a 3.5-year famine, where they didn't have the armchair quarterback capabilities to know, well, if I give up my final meal, the famine will end and God will save me. They didn't know that the 3.5-year period was going to be a 3.5-year period, right? Because when you're in the midst of a pandemic, do you know when it's going to end? She didn't know when it was going to end. Her status in the world made her a very low person, where if I needed a meal, I'm probably not going to go knock on that door. But the miracle happens because during a famine, she gives her last meal away. The last supper you will eat before you choose to die of starvation, because there is no other choice. And she gives it away to a prophet who does a miracle. And then there's that leper. And I asked you last week about open wounds on people's bodies. And you could only imagine, if you hadn't seen it, what that is all like. And there are people here that could tell you in detail what that is like. And you tell me where a God of love exists when you are a leper. When you are the type of person where anywhere you go, you have to stay away from everyone else, and you must, by law, shout, unclean, unclean. I mean, how do we go about in our pandemic age of letting other people know? Stay back. COVID-19 has crossed my threshold. I mean, don't you feel terrible having to announce that to people? You'd rather not tell them at all. I'll just stay home. I'll keep the doors locked. I won't go out anywhere. And we're not even talking about being covered in sores that will not heal or body parts that will rot away. Yet, Elijah helped this unclean person, and we better understand that faith is a big step between what you believe is promised and the assurance that you will receive. Jesus has aligned himself with famous prophets who were they themselves rejected. They themselves suffered death. And everything that happened to him or happened to them would soon happen to Jesus. But nobody knows it yet. And so Jesus' message, boiled down into my summation, is this. Y'all are so messed up that God's going to bless others. Y'all have been at the party the whole time, and you have become the party pooper. Right? And the summation continues with all those stories where Jesus is preparing a banquet or a wedding feast. And all the invited guests say, I got better things to do. I'm holding out for a better offer. Go to the people that have no offer at all. Go to the people who will not be invited. Go to the people that are not found on the guest list. And that's who Jesus is saying he is there to rescue, who he is there to save, and those who will receive his miracles are those who have been counted out, and they are not in the hometown crowd. That with God, there are no ethnic boundaries separating us from his love. There is no containment to God's love, as much as we might want to contain it. Have you ever wondered why so many churches start with the word first? Shouldn't we just change the word to best? Shouldn't we just change the word to better than everybody else? Otherwise, why not be second, third, fourth, or the 100 millionth? Falling into the same problems because we set up our boundaries and we say, well, if you want to be a part of this brand of religion, you need to adhere to our rules. And our title does have the word first. And we say we're not like that, but yet we are kind of like that, you know? And if I don't like the message that this prophet has given me, well, then he's not a prophet. And he can go teach and preach somewhere else, but he's not going to be welcome in this hometown. And the story continues after we better understand that there is no limit to God's love, although we try all the time to limit it. Verse 28, when they heard this, the people in the synagogue were furious. Jumping up, they mobbed him and forced him to the edge of a hill on which the town was built. They intended to push him over the cliff. They passed him right through the crowd. Oh, sorry. But he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. Now, in my mind's eye, how do I relate this since I was not there and I did not see it? And how did they get in such a rage that they jumped to their feet? And is it a Steve Urkel episode from the late 80s? Is it my mom really getting after me and grabbing me by my ear and yanking me where she wanted me to go? Is it the late night I experienced once in New Orleans where a man pulled a knife on me and 3 of my friends and decided he was going to take matters into his own hands? Or was it like the many times where I was on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter during Mardi Gras, and you think you're an individual, and then you realize you're in a crowd of, 500,000. And that mob decides to do what it wants to do. And then you find out very quickly, you're not different from the mob. You're right there in the thick of it too. And so all of this rage, the Bible calls it furious with anger, furiously angry, filled with great rage, filled with wrath, seething in anger. On the home front, as I raise little kids, sometimes I'll be getting after it, discipline, and my voice downstairs will rattle the cage of the other adult upstairs. You know what I mean? Whoa, don't you think that you are a little too angry? Don't you think you were a little too harsh? And I was like, oh, hey there, Black Kettle. I've heard you before too, in your furious fits of anger. Or how many break rooms have you stumbled into in the course of your journey and said, oh, I shouldn't have walked in there? Okay, you don't have a break room. How many barns have you opened up to see the neighborhood collection of farmers really getting after the gossip and anger of that day? And you think, well, I'll have to buy my seed elsewhere, maybe. How many times before or after church have things been said or done that either were because of furious anger or the result of great rage? And then instead of one first, maybe we have 2 now. Maybe we have 3 or 4. How many First Christian churches are there, you think? How many First Baptists? How many First Presbyterians? Shouldn't there only be 1? It's a fickle group, getting people together and trying to worship something that is beyond any explanation. But that's what we're doing right now. And so Jesus is telling this crowd that God's blessings wouldn't be for them because it would be for others. He healed this Gentile, pagan, non-Jewish, non-Christian, whatever, not part of the team you want to classify her as, and he showed kindness so that the hearers of this story would become even more unbelieving. The poor would hear good news. The rich would hear woes. Those notorious for great wickedness and sickness would be the ones healed. Those notorious sinners who Jesus was suspect because he dined with gluttons and drunkards, those are the ones who would receive the call to his loving embrace and respond to it. Those with the faith of a mustard seed would be blessed, while those with the self-righteous, hollow faith would only hear judgment. Yes, he raised people from the dead, and they were the very people that this congregation said should not be raised from the dead. Case in point, Jesus is said to have raised a Roman officer's son from the dead. A Roman officer who Jesus and his people wished to be vanquished from their area and from the world, and he resurrected a foreign ruler's son. So that ruler could do what? Continue to oppress the oppressed? I wonder. You know, again, we have hindsight working for us. And everybody in this congregation doesn't know it, but they understand all these prophets came and went, and so did the first temple that we all hold in high esteem in our hearts and minds, because generations ago it was destroyed, and then those who were around got carried off in what was called exile. But it happened hundreds of years ago. You know, we've lived so long, none of us have lived through the last pandemic. And so when the next one came around, we had a hard time wrestling with the idea that any others came around because we haven't been alive to see it. These people weren't alive the last time the temple was destroyed, but some of them would be alive the next time the temple was going to be destroyed. In about a generation's time, 30 or 40 years, depending on which scholar you look at, but Rome is going to come through and decimate the land and leave no stone unturned. And so Jesus was talking figuratively and literally when he says he's the cornerstone and all these stones are going to go top